Okay. Oops. There we go. All right, so today we're talking about the Columbian Exchange. Um, so we're looking at the globe and we're going to just cut it in half. Okay, so we have the Western Hemisphere, which is where the United States and South America is. And then we have the Eastern Hemisphere, which is where Europe and Africa are. And these two parts of the world are very different from each other. They're culturally different for the people. They have different ecosystems. They have different diseases. And then they have different flora and fauna. And that means like plants and flowers. So when we look at the Western Hemisphere, we call that the New World. When we look at the Eastern Hemisphere, we call that the Old World. So before the Columbian Exchange, in the world, there were a lot of different changes. So before the Columbian Exchange, there were no oranges in or in Florida, which we know a lot of oranges come from Florida. There were no bananas in Ecuador, no tomatoes in Italy, which means no pizza, no spaghetti, nothing like that. There were no pineapples in Hawaii, no cattle in Texas, no chocolate in Switzerland, potatoes in Ireland. So these are kind of a big deal because we associate them with those places. The Columbia Exchange, basically, what we're talking about today is the things that came from North America over to Europe and the things that came from Europe and Africa over to North and South America. So when we're talking about this, the explorers that we talked about last week created contact between Europe and the Americas, and the interaction with the Native Americans led to very big cultural changes. They exchanged with each other animals, plants, diseases, weapons, all between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. So what animals did they exchange? So Old World to New World. Um, we have animals such as horses, cattle, pigs, sheep, goats, and chickens, which means Europe and Africa had all of these animals, but the United States and South America didn't have them. We didn't have horses, we didn't have cattle, we didn't have pigs, none of that. And they brought them over to the New World. The New World had llamas, alpacas, and guinea pigs, kind of limited. And so they sent those over to the Old World, over to Europe. When it comes to plants, the list is much, much longer. So things that were originally in the Eastern Hemisphere were introduced to the Western Hemisphere. And that makes things a little bit different because we know a lot of this stuff is really common things that we see on a daily basis. Tomatoes, potatoes, pumpkin, pineapple, beans, peanuts, all those things that were not originally there. So if you look at this map, and you're going to see one like this tomorrow on your worksheet. So all the things that came from North America that went over to Europe, and then all the things that came from Europe and Africa that went over to the Americas. So you can see we've got the cows, that's cattle. Those were not in the United States at all. Okay, and they came over from Europe. Bananas, we'd never had those before. Peaches, pears, all sorts of fruits. The honeybee originated in Africa. The honeybee came over with the ships. We didn't have any bees in the United States or South America. So there's a lot of things we would not have had this exchange not happened. But you notice this little cross and bones over here, and that's the diseases that came from Europe over to North America. They brought with them smallpox, influenza, which is the flu, whooping cough, malaria. Those diseases had never existed in the Americas before, and they brought them over. And so most people in Europe already had an immunity to these things, but the people in North America and South America did not. So some impact of some of this exchange that went on. The potatoes and corn became major food sources for Europeans, allowing their population to grow greatly, especially in Ireland with the potatoes. And so people started to live longer because they had access to more food. Activities like cattle ranching and coffee growing were not possible without the Columbian Exchange, and so now they were. And so we start to see things like traditional cuisines, something as simple as a hamburger, would not have existed in North America or South America before the Columbian Exchange. They brought over with them a lot of new animals, but probably the most important one was that they brought over the horse, which changed Native American life, allowing tribes to hunt the buffalo more effectively. And that also allowed them to have animals that provided meat, hides, transportation, hauling. And so a lot of these animals were a big game changer for North and South America. Unlike the huge effect that plants had on other parts of the world, American animals had very little effect. One domesticated animal that did have an effect was the turkey. We sent the turkey over to Europe, which obviously provides quite a bit of meat. And raccoons, for some reason, were fancied for their fur, meaning Europeans really liked the look of raccoon fur. But other than those two animals, the animals we sent to Europe didn't really have much of an impact. So the diseases, nearly all of the European diseases were communicable by air and touch. So just like we're dealing with the pandemic right now, the diseases we're talking about, like smallpox and malaria, they're transmitted by touch and by air. So these diseases were really, really dangerous, and they are going to have a huge negative effect on the Native American population because they didn't have any antibodies to fight these diseases off. So we're talking about in Central America, about 25 million to a little less than 1 million in 1605 that are going to die from smallpox. In North America, 90% of Native Americans are going to be gone within 100 years of the Plymouth Landing because of the diseases brought by Europe. So only 10% of the Native Americans are going to survive the diseases that are brought from Europe. That is the biggest part of the decimation of Native Americans. It is not that the Native Americans were killed off by Europeans, it's that the diseases killed them off. They had no natural resistance to these diseases. The Incan Empire decreased from 13 million to 2 million because of these diseases. The North American population fell from 2 million to just under 500,000. So very big, devastating impact. So we've talked about this a couple of times before, but this is just another way to look at it. North America and South America sent gold, silver, corn, potatoes, beans, vanilla, chocolate, tobacco, cotton. All that went over to Europe. Europe sent over wheat, sugar, rice, coffee, horses, cows, pigs, lots of diseases, and Africa sent over the enslaved Africans. So this is the exchange that went on between the groups. Two of the biggest cultural changes that the Europeans brought to the New World were religion and language. So the Europeans brought over Christianity, and they wanted to go into North and South America and convert everybody to Christianity. They went all over the world, and they built schools. They taught languages such as Spanish, Portuguese, and Dutch to the Native Americans and brought religion with them. Europeans took gun and steel to parts of Africa and to the Americas. They also introduced ways to use the wheel in the Americas. Horses were introduced for riding as well as carrying heavy loads. Oxen were introduced for plowing fields. So in North America and South America, they had never used these animals to create large plantations or farms, and now they can do that. Native Americans taught the Europeans a lot too. They taught the Europeans farming methods. They also learned how to make canoes, the snowshoe, the hammock, and the poncho. And in exchange, Europeans introduced to the Native Americans metalworking, how to build ships, new forms of weapons, and guns. Okay, so that is the end of the Columbian Exchange for today. So tomorrow what you guys are going to do is there's going to be a worksheet with a reading guide, which means it's got a section from the book. And all you guys have to do is look in the section from the book to find the answers for the reading guide or for the worksheet. If you have questions about that, I'm going to show it to you real quick so that you guys know what you're doing for tomorrow. Okay, so the first thing is really, really easy. It says create a short restaurant menu. So all I want you to do is include the foods that you like to eat. 5 main courses, 3 side dishes, and 3 miscellaneous items. So you just have to write down food you guys love, okay? Using the diagram below, you're going to list the items that went from the Americas to Europe and Africa, and vice versa. And there's a page 572, that is going to be listed on the assignment tomorrow for you to do that, okay? Then you're going to look back at your menu and figure out which food would not be available before the Columbian Exchange, okay? You're going to give me 3 definitions. What is capitalism, joint stock company, and mercantilism? You're going to fill in the blank here, and then you're going to give me the answer to this question here. How did this economic change the lives of people in Europe? So not a lot of questions for tomorrow. There'll be a reading that has 571 to 575. You do not need to read the entire thing. You're just using it to help you answer a few questions. Okay? So anybody have questions for tomorrow?